For now, however, let us return to the grimy decks and learn a little more about the typical scenarios
Grimy decks.
which a crew may be forced to face.
The likest
Before
of
we
this.
begin, we must realize that unless one has sold their soul for the immortal gifts of the warp, that time governs all.
Ah.
Life aboard a naval vessel can at times be quite slow, with mates spending decades out on patrol, with the only interesting occurrence being the sight of a distant...
So a single patrol, a single deployment, that's an entire deployment, would last for decades, years. My God. I mean, you'd have to be crazy to actually sign the enlistment contract for this Navy.
Leviathan, silently vanishing into the dense clouds of a nebula.
Ooh.
Thus, to keep their crews sane, the captains will set out an ordered schedule, ensuring that each sweat-soaked hour is distinct from the last, staving off the ever-present risks of calenture within the ship. Derivations in time will often be the first sign.
Hold on, it's a very interesting word, calenture. Yes, when I was a kid, I'd read, and camera phones didn't exist. Every time I'd read a book, I'd make sure that I'd have a dictionary with me. Calenture. Meaning. Feverish delirium, supposedly caused by heat in the tropics. Okay. So I guess calenture in this context would be out of boredom. Good to know. Learn something new every day.
Sign that the ship has fallen to the influences of the warp, and so the officer of the watch will strictly break up the day into regular 4-hour periods known as watches. The crews will then be divided into roughly equal teams and will replace one another come the end of their watch, ensuring that all tasks
Would
upon
want to
the
live
ship
in that
are
place.
constantly being fulfilled, but also that each crewmate has plenty of time to rest their mind and recover from the horrors of the void.
If you have a good
With that
captain.
said, there can never be true rest for one caught adrift in the abyss. One's sleep will be punctuated by the slumbering screams of their bunkmates, yelling out in abject terror as the existential dread of their post finally sinks in.
Man-made
At times,
horrors
you may awaken
beyond the comprehension. Holy crap. Why would you do this to yourself? Like I said, people, the worst thing you can be in this grim, dark world is a regular person. And if you get isekai to it, guess what? I doubt you'd be a space marine.
in the dark just to spy a prowling crew member hunched over, stumbling from one too many huffs of promethium, only for them to be promptly executed
Promethium?
by a merciless commissar.
Comments, please.
Your time off duty may even be disrupted by the mutinous uprising of a chaos cult formed amidst the crew after a particularly rough bout of war.
Holy crap! So no matter what happens, children, things can always get worse. There are cults within the ship, forming within the ship.
Travel, with the cultists each screaming out that they can feel the warp overtaking them, and that it is a good pain. In a ship with a crew count climbing into the hundreds of thousands, you can be sure that at any given moment, that somewhere on the ship, someone is conspiring to further their own position at the detriment of their fellows. The commissars, whilst effective, cannot always be present to quell such criminal activities, but thankfully, they do not have to be the sole enforcers to the ship.
What, bosuns and mates?
The crew designated as armsmen will be allowed access to an armory, providing them with naval patterns of las guns, autoguns, and shotguns. They will then be sent out on patrol, partly to keep the other mates in line, but also to act as the first and often last line of defense against any infiltrative attacks upon the ship. If they stumble upon a mutinous band of renegades, or simply find an errant stowaway in the cargo bay, then they will have a duty to stand and fight, hopefully slowing the dastards, until the better equipped voidsmen-at-arms or commissars can
has there been a case of an entire ship being taken over by cultists? Can someone please put it down in the comments?
Respond for duty. Now, whilst an Imperial vessel provides a good deal of protection to those within, we must acknowledge that it is a rather common tactic amidst naval battles to break open a hole in the enemy vessel and send in a boarding crew to conquer
Holy crap, so boarding action still exists?
the ship from within. Typically, a cruiser will position itself in close range to a target before firing out a series of boarding pods, transportation shuttles, or manned torpedoes, which will slam into the outer hull before burrowing deeply into the bowels of the ship, unleashing squads of naval specialists to wreak havoc throughout the craft. In the case of an Imperial battleship, being perhaps 15 kilometers long, with over 100,000 crew within, you would imagine that the armed mates would swarm the intrusive boarding party, like bees defending their hive from a hornet. But these troops have been specially trained and outfitted to inflict the maximum possible damage in the shortest possible time, whilst also remaining evasive and hidden from the ship's crew. The naval admirals are well familiar with breaches leaving trails of explosives in vulnerable areas, or for pernicious aliens to scuttle about, leaving clutches of eggs hidden in dark corners, which will only gestate and burst open several months after this battle has concluded. Naturally, the crews will do what they can with the aforementioned arms at their disposal. But we must realize that a humble shipmate armed with a naval shotgun has very little chance of surviving an encounter with a Chaos Terminator, which has just materialized at the foot of his bunk. The Navy will train its own breaching teams to be fired into enemy vessels, and they will carry quite an interesting array of equipment to aid them in their disruptive tasks. Hatch cutters and axe jacks will use their chain fists and axes to cleave through protective bulkheads, revealing vulnerable systems of the ship, which may then be blown to shreds by a precise explosive blast, lain by a grenadier. Surveyors will map out the internals of the craft with their cat drones, whilst...
we're looking at the kill team. We're looking at the kill squad. It's a boarding party.
Void jammers shield their own presence and send out explosive drones built out of the skulls of fallen voidsmen to sabotage distant targets. These specialists will be defended by the Endurance, carrying heavy shotguns and boarding shields, who will form a defensive blockade behind which heavy gunners will unleash salvos of fire to clear a walkway of any measly crew who stand against them. It will be obvious to most of you that within...
Question. Are they guards? Are they regular humans? Or are they space marines? Comments, please.
In a void battle, the aforementioned boarding actions will only play a relatively minor role when compared to the sheer carnage brought about by the ship's primary weapons.
I was surprised that despite the existence of these type of weapons or these type of cannons, boarding action still exists. I mean, then again, there has to be a way for the infantry to play. It's Games Workshop after all.
Each and every ship will be bristling with extensive batteries of weapon systems ranging from macro cannons firing colossal explosive shells to plasma projectors which hurl superheated bolts of matter burning as brightly as the core of a newborn star. The Macrag's Honor, for instance, being the flagship of the Indomitus Crusade, is 26 kilometers long.
Macrag's Honor.
So it can sport a truly terrifying mass of armaments, making it almost able to contend with entire enemy fleets, by itself. But in any case, when two rival fleets encounter one another, then they will be quick to turn their weapons upon
Broadside.
one another and light up the darkness of the void with such intensity that they will surely outshine the blazing lights of all but the closest of stars. Macro shells and void torpedoes will roar to life, tearing through the darkness like furious beasts.
It's amazing that despite the angles that you can produce in space, they still used to choose broadside, which, I mean, this thing was supposedly built on Earth or supposedly built on a flat surface. But guys, here's the thing. After a couple of months of playing Elite Dangerous, right, one of the things I realized is that when you're driving a car, the only thing you have to be worried about is the particular dimension that you have access to, which is what your left, right, front, and rear side. But here is the thing, right? In Elite Dangerous, I learned that if you're in a ship like this, you have to worry about your top and your bottom. I mean, in other words, the entirety of all you have, instead of just having four flanks, your front, rear, port and starboard side, or left or right side, but you'd also have to worry about your top and a bottom flank because an enemy ship can literally go under you or above you in a situation like this. Okay, so I don't know. Just a bit strange that they choose to focus on the broadside.
Beasts shattering enemy hulls with
well, technically it's really not that weird for the simple reason that they designed these patterns after IRL ships, so there's that.
Each explosion to send a deadly shockwave through the craft, decimating the crews with each well-timed shot. Ancient bulkheads, once thought of as impenetrable, will melt away into globs of molten slag, liquefied from the searing bolts of
That's
plasma
a million lives
and arcs
gone.
of long-range laser fire. In these moments,
where do they get replacements? Do they make babies? Let's keep going.
entire sections of a battleship may be reduced to nothing more than smouldering debris, destined to now drift through the void, as the frigid gravestones to the nameless crewmates lost from the fated battle.
Yeah.
The captains and admirals will chart ever more daring courses through the maelstrom of their engagement, steering the mighty barges through the now blazing void of death in their desperate attempts to outflank.
There we go,
expose
outflank.
a rival ship to their fully loaded batteries.
Hmm.
Critical systems such as shield generators, engines, or life support systems will be specifically targeted by the crews hoping to cripple their foe before they themselves are engulfed by a similar attack. If a warp drive is destroyed, or if the navigators and astropathic choirs are killed, then the ship will be hamstrung from travel, and so, even if it survives the current engagement, it will be cursed to simply drift through the void, likely to become a fabled ghost ship, or, in time, to crash and meld with a larger space hulk.
Jesus, that is terrifying. I mean, there's nothing left but to drift through. No communications, no way to go back and forth.
With that said, if an Imperial ship has survived its conflict, with its engines and structural integrity kept intact, then it will be able to resume its journey, and for this, its captain may ordain for the ship to leave this plane of reality and prepare for warp travel. For starters, the ship will need to be steered to the outer borders of the local star system, to a location known as the Mandeville Point, where the gravitational influence of nearby orbital bodies is at its lowest, thus minimizing the risk of being caught in a gravity well and cast astray into the warp.
Alright, so just like regular ships, they have to simply, go far away enough from gravity. Amazing.
Along with their first officers and commissars, will be out on patrol, conducting their final inspections, though in truth this is more intended to boost the fading morale of the crew.
The fading morale of the crew.
As all aboard the vessel will understand that in a short few hours that they will be plunged into the literal depths of hell. Any who are driven to a state of panic will be swiftly removed from sight and executed lest they frighten the rest of the crew, who will need to steel themselves against the horrors soon to come. The captain himself may at this point begin to sweat, fearing for the task ahead. Yet warp jumps are a necessary part of space travel, and so even the noble figure will need to pull himself up by his boots
I guess it's the time
and
you
strap
pray
in for the waking nightmare of the warp.
The warp.
All areas of the ship, even if usually peaceful, will be swept up in a frenzied rush of acolytes, frantically chanting out hymns of preservation and purification, sanctifying every last corner of the
I
ship.
guess that's the only thing you can do is to pray the gay away or something. Crap.
And
Even I'm
purging
terrified.
the faintest traces of evil from its dusty holds. Any colossal viewports or arched windows will be sealed away behind metallic shutters, blocking the otherwise magnificent view of the cosmos, so as to protect the crew who may foolishly think that it is safe to peer out and stare into the roiling madness of the warp.
Who wouldn't be curious?
After a lengthy ritual, the tech priests will rouse the warp drives from slumber, and as they activate, the most sensitive of crew members will begin to feel tiny needle pricks behind their eyes, as the borders between this plane and the next rapidly begin to thin.
That doesn't sound like a pleasant sensation.
All non-essential crewmates will now be ordered to retreat deeper into the craft and to strap themselves into safety harnesses, their own rushed breathing soon to be drowned out by the rising cacophony of prayers booming across the ship, chanted by the choirs of priests, each fearful that their best efforts won't be enough to save them. As this reaches its crescendo, and as the captain gives his final command, the warp drives will let out an immense roar of energy, rending a hole in reality itself, behind which lies the impossible hellscape of the warp. As roaming commissars execute those who are lost to the sudden chaos, the ship's engines will flare into life, plunging the ship into the rift, where it will vanish from the material universe, and the portal behind it will seal shut forevermore. The Geller fields will then flicker on, preventing the ravenous entities of the warp from feasting upon the delectable and succulent souls within.
What happens if your soul gets sucked out? Comments, please.
But from this point on, none of the crew truly matter, and all of their lives will now be in the hands of the mutant navigator, who must steer this mighty barge through the tempestuous storm of psychic fury until they finally reach their intended destination. Jumps of around 4 to 5 light years can be performed almost instantaneously, but for distances larger than this, the navigator will need to contend with the ebbing tides of the warp for hours, days, or even weeks at a time. Yet there are none more suited for the task than of the mutants. Guided by the light of the Astronomicon, they will sail the sea of souls, until at long last they will signal to the captain that they have arrived. And as the warp drives roar into life once more, the ship will be ejected from the chaos of the warp, finally to be reunited with the lands of the living. At this point, the captain and their crew may let out a sigh of relief.
We survived!
For they have survived an ordeal most horrific. But they will ever bear the scars of their journey as silent nightmares, for none may venture into the warp.
I mean, after going through something like that, no wonder cults rise up and the trauma. Just imagine the trauma of going through something like that.
And truly emerge unscathed. We have only just scratched the surface of what there is to be known.
Of course
on the
we have.
subject
We've
of
been
the
here for more than
Imperial
an
Navy.
hour now.
And in truth, we could spend countless more hours learning of the many intricacies which pervade this galaxy-spanning organization. For instance, with the crews, we could return to speak on the tech priests, where only the most senior of magi will be permitted to commune directly with the enigmatic machine spirits which lurk within the ships of the Dark Age. The sheer age and power of the spirits which inhabit the ancient battleships can be truly overwhelming to junior priests, shorting out the circuitry of their cybernetic minds, leaving them as a smoking heap of a fool who tried to make contact with a veritable god. Similarly, we touched on the
What's
topic
wrong
of
with
logistics.
these people?
But in a ship with a crew count of even 100,000, we must consider that they would need a gargantuan stockpile of supplies to provide each mate with an adequate
Not to
supply
mention
of
a giant
nutritious
toilet.
gruel. Then there would be the question of washing and waste disposal, and of water recycling, air purification, and of the entertainment available during rec time. There would also be the constant political feuding held between rival factions, such as the ecclesiarchy or naval nobility, who themselves would need to contend with the tight-knit crews, ever waiting for their chance to rise up and claim the craft for themselves.
Of course.
Perhaps when we next investigate the Navy, we will explore the crew in more detail.
Yes, we should.
As the life of a naval crewmate is truly a rather fascinating topic.
I wouldn't call it fascinating.
Alternatively, many of you will be wondering
like
as to why I
terrifying.
failed to mention the void-faring rascals
The rogue
known
traders?
as rogue traders at any point during our sermon.
Want it down in the comments if you guys want to play that one, but I doubt I have the money for it. But you know what? Let's go.
The reason behind this is that they are technically not a
Part of the Imperial Navy.
and rather they fall
I mean,
outside
rogue,
of the
the word
official
rogue.
purview of the Lords, acting more as mercenary explorers, being paid to perform specific tasks or to expand the borders of the Imperium, with very little in the way of oversight. They will have the freedom to go where they wish, and to speak with the same authority held by a chapter master of the Space Marines, to establish new trade routes, discover new worlds for colonization, or to simply map out the wilderness and to bring the light of the Emperor to even the darkest
Corners of the void.
We must also consider that, from all that we have learned, that there will be equivalent points on the rival species and empires of the galaxy. The Orcs, for instance, will have their own crude hierarchies within their fleets, though it most often falls back on their classic view that the biggest, greenest and meanest of Orcs should rightly claim the mantle of command. Conversely, the Tau ships are only to be operated by the members of the air caste.
An air cast?
But I would very much
Does
doubt
air
that
exist
they
in
appoint any of
space?
their crewmates, with equivocal roles to the commissariat of the Imperium. But in any case, I do believe that those topics will have to wait for another day, as it seems that we have now come to our end. Thank you all for joining me on this investigation into the Imperial Navy, and for listening to this sermon in its entirety. For now, however, I must once again close this chapter, and so, as I go, I will leave you all with a very warm goodbye.
Bye! Thank you for watching, guys. Now, if you want me to check out other stories here on YouTube, please let me know in the comments. We upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard. Please like, share, subscribe, do the whole notification button thing to help me out with the algo. And don't forget to check out our Twitch channel where you can catch me do this live. Now, class dismissed.